Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. There are things you build with your hands, and there are things you build with your heart. For me, they were one and the same. For 30 years, I was an architect. I didn't just design buildings, I tried to design spaces that could hold a life. But my masterpiece, the only project that ever truly mattered, was a villa on the coast I named Serena. It wasn't a commission. It was a love letter, written in stone and glass and timber to my wife, Isabella. We found the land when we were young and still struggling, a wild, forgotten cliffside plot that nobody wanted. We bought it with every penny we had and spent the next 10 years building the villa ourselves, weekend by weekend, holiday by holiday. I designed every inch of it, and she infused it with soul. Her touch was everywhere. In the mosaic tiles she laid by hand on the patio, in the scent of the jasmine she planted that now crawls up the western wall, in the worn, comfortable armchair she chose for the reading nook that catches the morning sun. Our son Julian grew up there. His childhood is etched into the very fabric of the place. His height chart is still faintly visible on a doorframe in the kitchen. The small, clumsy birdhouse he built with me still hangs from the old olive tree in the courtyard. Serena wasn't just a house, it was the repository of our family soul, a physical manifestation of everything we were. When I lost Isabella to a long and cruel illness, the villa became my sanctuary. It was the only place I could still feel her presence, hear the echo of her laughter on the sea breeze. Julian was my rock during that time. He and his new wife, Cassandra, were constantly by my side. I saw in their concern a reflection of the love Isabella and I had poured into him. I was grateful, so grateful that my son had grown into such a caring, compassionate man. I was a fool. Julian had always been a good boy, but Cassandra, she came from a different world. Her family, the Brooks, were people who understood the cost of everything and the value of nothing. They were pleasant on the surface, all polished smiles and polite inquiries, but their eyes were always moving, always appraising. The first time Julian and Cassandra brought them to Serena, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the coastal wind. Mr. Brooke walked through the rooms not like a guest, but like an inspector. He complimented the hand-carved mahogany doors by asking what the lumber must have cost. Mrs. Brooke admired Isabella's handcrafted mosaic by remarking on the potential resale value of a property with such unique features. They saw my love letter as a balance sheet. I tried to dismiss my unease. I told myself I was just a grieving old man, overly sensitive, protective of my wife's memory. Julian loved Cassandra, and I needed to embrace her family as my own. But their visits became more frequent, and their presence began to feel like a slow, creeping occupation. Cassandra would walk through the villa, making small, insidious suggestions. "You know, Elias," she'd say, her voice dripping with synthetic sweetness, "a lighter color on these walls would really open up the space, make it feel more modern." She was talking about the warm terracotta plaster Isabella and I had mixed and applied with our own hands. Julian, who had once defended the villa's every quirk and imperfection with a fierce loyalty, would just nod along. "Cassie has a great eye for design, Dad," he'd say, avoiding my gaze. He was a stranger to me, a hollowed-out version of the boy I had raised, his own opinions replaced by hers. They started treating the villa like their personal weekend retreat, showing up unannounced with their friends, their loud, shallow laughter echoing in rooms that were built for quiet contemplation and love. They would move Isabella's things, replacing her simple, elegant decorations with their own cold, minimalist trinkets. Each change was a small stab to my heart, a tiny act of erasure. I was becoming a guest in my own sanctuary. The final, unthinkable step in their campaign began with a conversation about estate planning. It was Julian who initiated it, sitting me down at the large oak table I had built myself. He had a folder of papers, his expression a careful mask of filial concern. He spoke of inheritance taxes, of probate courts, of the complexities of managing an asset like the villa. He said he wanted to protect me, to ensure that everything was taken care of so I wouldn't have to worry. He proposed creating a simple trust, a legal entity that would hold the villa. He would be the trustee, managing the property on my behalf. "It's just a formality, Dad," he said, his voice smooth and reassuring. "It just makes everything cleaner, legally. You'll still live here whenever you want. Nothing will change. This just protects your legacy." I was tired. My grief for Isabella was a constant, heavy cloak, and the thought of fighting him, of questioning his motives, was exhausting. He was my son, my only child. Despite the warning bells clanging in my soul, a part of me, a desperate, foolish part, still wanted to believe in the boy I had raised. So I trusted him. I went with him to his lawyer, a man with a smile as sharp and cold as the glass on his desk. I listened as they explained the legal jargon, the words washing over me in a meaningless tide. And I signed the papers. I signed away my masterpiece, my love letter, my sanctuary. I signed it over to the son I thought would be its guardian, its protector. I had no idea I was signing its death warrant. I was so glad I kept the old blueprints, the original survey documents, and the file containing every permit and every zoning variance I had ever negotiated with the county. I kept them not out of suspicion, but out of habit, the meticulous record-keeping of a man who had built his life from the ground up. I had no idea that those dusty old papers, hidden in a lockbox in my city apartment, were the only weapon I would have left. The change, after I signed the papers, was not immediate. It was a slow, creeping tide. For a few months, the illusion held. I would go to Serena on weekends, and Julian and Cassandra would be there, playing the part of gracious hosts in a home that was no longer mine. But the soul of the place was being systematically ripped out. The books in Isabella's reading nook were replaced with glossy, unread art magazines. The comfortable, worn furniture was swapped for cold, angular pieces that looked like they belonged in a hotel lobby. My workshop, my sacred space, was cleared out and converted into a yoga studio for Cassandra and her friends. My tools and half-finished projects unceremoniously boxed up and shoved into a damp corner of the garage. I was witnessing the methodical desecration of my wife's memory, and I had handed them the legal right to do it. I tried to protest, but my words were met with a placating condescension. "Dad, we're just updating things," Julian would say, patting my arm. "Bringing the place into the 21st century, Mom would have wanted it to look its best." The lie was so audacious, so utterly dismissive of the woman who had cherished every handmade imperfection, that it left me speechless. He was using her memory as a justification for erasing her. The Brooks were at the villa constantly now. They had, in effect, moved in. They treated me with a polite, dismissive tolerance, the kind of courtesy one extends to a senile old relative who doesn't understand he's become a burden. I would find Mr. Brooke in my study, smoking a cigar, his feet up on the desk I had designed. Mrs. Brooke would complain about the outdated kitchen appliances and make lists of the renovations they planned. They spoke of the villa's future as if I were already dead. My son, the boy whose hands I had guided as he hammered his first nail into the frame of this house, stood by and watched it all happen. I saw the shame in his eyes, the flicker of guilt he tried so hard to hide, but it was always quickly extinguished by a proud, approving glance from Cassandra or her father. He had made his choice. He had traded his father for an inheritance, his soul for a seat at their table. The day I found out the true extent of his betrayal was a cold, rainy Saturday in November. I had driven to Serena, needing to feel the sea air, needing to connect with the one place I still felt Isabella's presence, even if it was fading. I arrived to find a large moving truck parked in the driveway. Men were carrying the Brooks furniture, their boxes, their entire lives, into my home. My home. Cassandra and her mother were directing the movers, their voices sharp and excited. Julian was standing off to the side, his hands in the pockets of a ridiculously expensive coat, a tense, unhappy expression on his face.
I walked up to him, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. "What is this, Julian?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "What's going on?" He wouldn't look at me. He stared out at the gray, churning sea. "Cassie's parents, they sold their house," he mumbled. "They needed a place to stay for a while." "A while?" I said, my voice rising despite myself. "This is their furniture, their life. This is not a while, Julian. This is an occupation." Cassandra must have heard us. She walked over, her smile a brittle, painted-on thing. "Elias," she said, her tone dripping with false sympathy, "my parents have had a bit of a financial setback. They needed to downsize. We all just thought, since the villa is so large and you're barely here anymore." "Barely here?" I stared at her, the sheer audacity of it taking my breath away. "This is my home." Cassandra and her mother were directing the movers, their voices sharp and excited. Julian was standing off to the side, his hands in the pockets of a ridiculously expensive coat, a tense, unhappy expression on his face. I walked up to him, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. "What is this, Julian?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "What's going on?" He wouldn't look at me. He stared out at the gray, churning sea. "Cassie's parents, they sold their house," he mumbled. "They needed a place to stay for a while." "A while?" I said, my voice rising despite myself. "This is their furniture, their life. This is not a while, Julian. This is an occupation." Cassandra must have heard us. She walked over, her smile a brittle, painted-on thing. "Elias," she said, her tone dripping with false sympathy, "my parents have had a bit of a financial setback. They needed to downsize. We all just thought, since the villa is so large and you're barely here anymore." "Barely here?" I stared at her, the sheer audacity of it taking my breath away. "This is my home."
Julian finally turned to look at me, and the last of the boy I knew was gone. His eyes were cold, hard, the eyes of a stranger. He had the look of a man who had crossed the line and knew there was no going back, so he had to double down on the cruelty. "Not anymore, Dad," he said, his voice flat and final. "I'm the trustee. I manage the property now, remember? The Brooks needed a place to live. I'm letting them live here. It's what's best for the family." And then he delivered the line that severed the last frayed thread of our relationship, the line that would echo in my nightmares for months. "It's theirs now." His words hung in the damp, salty air, a verdict and a sentence. I looked from my son's merciless face to the house, my Serena, being filled with the tacky, soulless belongings of these usurpers. I saw Mrs. Brooke directing a mover to take down a painting of the coastline that Isabella had done, to make room for a hideous, mass-produced abstract piece. It was all so clear. This had been the plan all along. The trust, the legal papers, my son's feigned concern. It was all a long, elaborate con to steal my home, my legacy, my wife's memory, and hand it over to these grasping, greedy people. The pain was a physical thing, a crushing weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I had lost my wife, and now, in that single brutal moment, I had lost my son. But as I stood there in the rain, watching my life being dismantled, something else began to stir beneath the grief. It was the old, familiar feeling of a builder surveying a problem, the quiet, methodical anger of a craftsman seeing his work defiled. They thought they had won. They thought they had outsmarted the sentimental old man. They had the legal papers, the title, the trust. They had the house. But they didn't know the house. They didn't know its secrets. I had built Serena from the bedrock up. I knew every beam, every wire, every pipe. And I knew about the covenant, the one I had put in place myself all those years ago. A legal tripwire hidden in the fine print of the original deed, a secret I had almost forgotten myself. A covenant that tied the land to its purpose and to its creator.
They had stolen my house, but they had no idea that the house itself was a trap, and I was the only one who knew how to spring it. I turned away from my son without another word. I got back in my car, my hand steady on the wheel, and drove away. The war was not over. It had just begun. Grief can paralyze you, but betrayal is a powerful stimulant. The 6-hour drive back to my city apartment was not a journey of defeat. It was a mobilization. The initial shock, the feeling of being hollowed out by my son's cruelty, was already beginning to harden into a cold, clear resolve. They had declared war on my past, on my love, on Isabella's memory. I would fight back with the one weapon they couldn't understand, the house itself. I turned away from my son without another word. I got back in my car, my hand steady on the wheel, and drove away. The war was not over. It had just begun. Grief can paralyze you, but betrayal is a powerful stimulant. The 6-hour drive back to my city apartment was not a journey of defeat. It was a mobilization. The initial shock, the feeling of being hollowed out by my son's cruelty, was already beginning to harden into a cold, clear resolve. They had declared war on my past, on my love, on Isabella's memory. I would fight back with the one weapon they couldn't understand, the house itself.
They saw Serena as an asset, a piece of real estate. I knew it as a living entity with a history and a set of rules they had no idea existed. The first thing I did when I got home was unlock the heavy, fireproof box in my study. Inside, beneath decades of old photographs and letters, was a thick file labeled Serena Originals. I pulled out the original deed and the land survey documents, my fingers tracing the familiar lines and legal descriptions. And there it was, a clause I had insisted upon all those years ago, a piece of legal poetry I had crafted with a young, idealistic lawyer who shared my vision. It was a restrictive land covenant. When I bought the land, it was zoned as protected coastal wilderness. To get the building permits, I had to agree to certain conditions to ensure the property would never be overdeveloped or commercialized. But I had gone a step further. I had added a personal ironclad covenant, registered with the county and legally bound to the deed in perpetuity. The covenant stated that the structure built on the land was intended as a single-family dwelling for the sole and primary use of the original architect-builder and his direct blood descendants. It was specific. It wasn't just about ownership, it was about usage. The clause I was looking for was buried in subsection C. It explicitly forbade the property from being used as a primary residence by any non-blood relatives, and it specifically prohibited the transfer of living rights or long-term tenancy to third parties even if no rent was exchanged. It was designed to prevent the villa from being turned into a rental property, a corporate retreat, or, as it turned out, a free retirement home for a grifter's in-laws. It was my masterstroke, a legal failsafe I had built into the very DNA of the land, and my son had just blindly, arrogantly walked right into it. Julian, in his haste to appease his wife and her family, had committed a critical error. He had transferred the title into a trust, which was legal, but then he, as trustee, had transferred the use of the property to the Brooks, turning them into permanent residents. He had violated the covenant. My path forward was clear. I wouldn't sue my own son. A public, messy family lawsuit would only cause more pain and desecrate Isabella's memory with tabloid-style drama. My approach would be quieter, colder, and far more devastating. I would use the faceless, implacable power of bureaucracy. I spent the next week preparing. I made copies of the original deed, the covenant document, and the land survey. I then began to gather evidence. I hired a discreet private investigator, a former journalist who specialized in quiet, deep-dive research. His job was simple, to prove that the Brooks were not guests, but permanent residents. It was astonishingly easy.
Within days, he had a mountain of proof. The Brooks had registered their cars at the villa's address. They had filed a change of address with the post office. They had enrolled in local community groups and listed the villa as their home. They were receiving mail, packages, and utility bills in their name at my address.
They weren't just living there. They were embedding themselves, arrogantly assuming their possession was absolute. With my evidence compiled into a neat, undeniable package, I made my move. I didn't contact the county planning department as myself. That would connect the complaint back to me. Instead, I drafted a letter as a concerned neighbor and member of the Coastal Preservation Society. My letter was a work of art, a masterpiece of feigned civic duty. I wrote of my deep respect for the protected coastline. I mentioned my concern that the unique single-family nature of the Serena property was being violated. I noted the increased traffic, the constant presence of a family who were not the Vances, and my fear that this might set a precedent for other properties in the protected zone. I included copies of the covenant as a helpful reminder of the land's legal status and enclosed a few key pieces of the PI's evidence: a photo of the Brooks mail being delivered, a screenshot of their new address on a public website, as troubling observations. I sealed the anonymous letter and sent it not to a specific person, but to the general mailbox of the county Zoning and Enforcement Division. I had planted a seed in the most fertile ground for bureaucratic chaos. An anonymous tip from a concerned citizen about a zoning violation, especially in a protected coastal area, is something a government office cannot ignore. It would trigger a slow, methodical, and utterly impersonal investigation. They would send an inspector, they would issue warnings, they would levy fines, and they would do it all without emotion, without any regard for the family drama behind the scenes. They were the perfect weapon. Julian and the Brooks would be fighting a ghost. They would have no idea where the attack was coming from. They would be trapped in a maze of legal notices and escalating penalties, their frustration and anger turning inward, poisoning the very relationships their greed had been meant to enrich. I had laid the first stone in the slow, inevitable demolition of their stolen paradise. Now, all I had to do was wait for the foundation to crack. And I, the original architect, knew exactly where the weak points were. The first sign that the gears of bureaucracy were turning came about a month later. My private investigator, who was still monitoring the situation, sent me a photo of a bright orange notice pasted on the front gate of Serena. It was a preliminary notice of zoning violation from the county. It cited a potential breach of covenant and scheduled a mandatory inspection. I could almost feel the first tremor of panic from 100 miles away. The Brooks, I imagined, would have torn it down in a fit of indignation, dismissing it as a mistake. Julian would have made a few calls, full of his new self-importance, and been met with the infuriatingly polite stonewalling of a government clerk. The wheels were in motion. The first inspection was followed by a formal letter of noncompliance. The county had cross-referenced the property records with my anonymous tip and confirmed the violation. The Brooks were illegal tenants. The trust, managed by Julian, was given 30 days to rectify the situation, which meant the Brooks had to vacate the premises. Of course, they didn't. Their arrogance wouldn't allow it. They likely saw it as a bureaucratic nuisance that their son-in-law, the big-shot finance guy, could make disappear. But this wasn't a business deal you could charm or bully your way through. This was a zoning violation, and the county had no sense of humor. When the 30 days passed, the fines began. They started small, a few $100s a day, a painful but manageable annoyance. Julian probably paid them, telling his in-laws it was under control. But the fines were designed to escalate. They doubled, then tripled. Soon, they were paying thousands of dollars a week in penalties for the privilege of illegally occupying my home. The financial strain was the acid that began to dissolve their smug family alliance. I envisioned the arguments, the recriminations. The Brooks, who had seen the villa as their free ticket to a life of luxury, were now a massive financial drain on their daughter and son-in-law. Cassandra, whose love for Julian seemed directly proportional to his ability to provide a certain lifestyle, would be seeing her future wedding fund,
her down payment being eaten alive by daily fines. The pressure on Julian must have been immense. He was trapped. He couldn't evict the Brooks without causing a catastrophic family implosion. He couldn't keep paying the fines without bankrupting himself. And he couldn't sell the villa because the ongoing legal dispute had placed a lien on the property, making it impossible to transfer the title. His grand prize had become a gilded cage, and the walls were closing in. The final blow came in the form of a notice of compulsory action. The county, its patience exhausted, was threatening legal action to seize the property until the covenant was respected. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about losing the villa entirely. That was the notice that finally brought my son to my doorstep. He looked terrible. He had lost weight, his expensive suit was rumpled, and the arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate, haunted look. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He demanded my help. "You have to fix this," he said, his voice cracking. "The county is out of control. They won't listen to me. You're the original owner. You have to call them, tell them it's all a misunderstanding." I let him finish, my face a calm, unreadable mask. I poured 2 glasses of water and sat down at my kitchen table, gesturing for him to do the same. "There is no misunderstanding, Julian," I said quietly. He stared at me, confused. "What are you talking about? Some crazy neighbor is trying to make trouble." "I am the crazy neighbor," I said. I watched the comprehension dawn on his face, the slow-motion explosion of realization. The color drained from his skin. He looked like he had been punched in the stomach. "You?" he whispered. "You did this?" "I did," I said. "You see, Julian, you and the Brooks, you stole a house, but you forgot to read the instructions. I built a rule into the foundation of that land, a rule that says it is a home, not a commodity. It is a legacy for my bloodline, not a freebie for grifters. You broke the rule. The house is simply enforcing it." He was speechless, his mind reeling as he understood the scale of the trap he was in. He saw that every notice, every fine, every legal threat had been a move in a game I had been controlling from the start. "Fix it," he finally croaked, his voice pathetic. "Please, Dad, I'll have them move out. We can fix it." "There is nothing to fix," I said, my voice as hard and unyielding as the stone of Serena's foundation. "You made your choice. You stood there and told me that my home, your mother's legacy, was theirs now. You chose them over me. You chose money over love. And this is the consequence. The house is a part of your mother's soul, Julian, and it will not be occupied by those who desecrated her memory." I stood up, the conversation over. "The fines will continue until they are out," I said. "The lien will remain until the covenant is respected. Your mess, your problem. You wanted to be the trustee of my legacy. Well, this is what it looks like to manage it." He left, a broken man. The fallout was swift and spectacular. The Brooks were forced to move out, their dream of a free coastal life in ruins. Their relationship with Julian and Cassandra was shattered, poisoned by months of financial stress and bitter accusations. Last I heard, Cassandra had left him. Her love, it turned out, was not designed to withstand a financial catastrophe. The villa, Serena, now sits empty. The county has placed it under a temporary protective order until the trust can be legally dissolved, a long and complicated process. I may never live there again, but that's all right. My revenge was never about getting the house back. It was about justice. It was about protecting Isabella's memory. Julian didn't just lose a property. He lost his father, his wife, his fortune, and his soul, all because he looked at a home built with love and saw only a price tag. I sit in my quiet city apartment, surrounded by the few true things that matter: the photographs of my wife, the memory of her laughter, and the knowledge that I honored her. I built Serena to last forever. I'm just glad I had the foresight to build in a firewall. That was today's story on Reddit Whispers. We all carry a breaking point. What was yours? Share in the comments, because you never know who needs to read it today.